Okay, it is 6 o'clock on January 18th, 2022. I call this meeting of the Wellfleet Select Board to order in accordance with the temporary suspension and enhancement of the open meeting law as allowed by the General Court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. At this time, before we go to open comments and public sessions, I would ask that Fred calls the Finance Committee to order as well.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, it being January 18th, 2022, we are having a joint meeting with the Select Board, and I'm calling the Finance Committee's participation in that meeting to order.
Okay, so first item on the agenda is announcements, open session, public comments. Public comments must be brief, and the board will not deliberate on any matter raised solely during public comments. Chief Hurley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening to both the Select Board and the Finance Committee this evening. Actually excited to have both boards here. Today marks a milestone with the department as we implement our department body camera program this week. For the past year and a half, our department has been preparing to deploy the body cameras on the officers in the department to increase transparency, promote de-escalation, resolve citizen complaints, and provide as a valuable training tool. I'd like to thank the Select Board administration and the community for their support for this program. And over the next few weeks and months, we'll be doing community outreach. However, as stated, you'll start seeing our officers out in the field wearing the body cameras. So thank you.
Okay. That brings us to Fincom. So Fred, can you chair the Fincom for this?
Yes, thank you, Ryan. And
sorry.
Thank you so much. This will be a relatively short session. There's just a little bit of business that we have to do. Before we get into it, I just want to mention, and I think you've already seen it, that there is a process. Ryan will be chairing the rest of the meeting after we finish our business, and there is a process for raising your hand in Zoom, and he has asked that we do that because there are so many people on. So if you want to be recognized, hit the little raise your hand button, and in whatever order they show up is how that'll work. I'm assuming we'll have some questions as we go. The only Fincom specific business we have tonight is first to presumably approve the meetings from our December 15th meet. They've been distributed. We have a quorum. By my count, there are 7 of us online right now, unless somebody's coming on in a few minutes. I would take a motion to approve the minutes from December 15th.
So moved.
Thank you, Mo. Second, please.
Second.
Okay, so I'm going to do a roll call vote by the order I have written people's names, because I don't know if it's the same on everyone's screen. I'm going to go aye. Mo.
Aye.
Ira. Unmuting, please.
Aye.
Kathleen.
Aye.
Jeff.
Aye.
And Jeff Behrens.
He's putting his thumb up.
Okay. Linda.
Aye.
And Stephen.
I wasn't present.
That's true. Okay, so it is past 7-0. There we go. There are actually 8 of us. The second bit of business is to vote either to recommend or not a transfer that was sent to us by Charlie, not quite in time for our last meeting. It's well, there's a long number associated with it, but it's for $2,056, and it has to do with monies that the Cemetery Commission has to raise, but cannot take out of their sale of plots. Charlie, would you mind just explaining it very briefly?
Yes, thank you, Fred. It appears that there had been a practice where if the cemetery commissioners had some expenses, they could use their revenues just to directly pay for those. And, and the reality is, there can be no expenditures without town meeting appropriation from a revenue account. So I've sort of identified that issue. And in the future, I'll try to build in some money in the DPW budget so that the work of the cemetery commissioners can get done using their own revenues. However, we do have a gentleman who's been working for the town, I believe, for quite some time, who is installs the corner markers when plots are sold. And, you know, this vendor deserves to be paid. There's an outstanding balance for his work for this year of $2,056. And the only way I could really come up with the deal with this is to ask the finance committee to issue a reserve fund transfer to an existing expense account. And that would be the DPW line item that deals with cemetery issues. And then in the spring, the cemetery commissioners will reimburse the general fund this same amount of money from their revenues. So anyway, that's the request.
Okay, thank you. Before I ask if anyone has any questions of you, I just want to say this is the third or fourth time we've been asked to do a transfer out of the Finance Committee Reserve Fund in the last few months, fourth, I believe.
Yeah.
And as you all know, typically transfers out of that fund are for unforeseen or extraordinary circumstances. We are sort of accepting that this year everything is unforeseen and extraordinary for all the obvious reasons, and trusting that going forward, it will revert to a more stringent view of what unforeseen and emergency or extraordinary means. If anybody has any questions, I see Kathleen, you have one. Kathy, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I
Fred,
can't say
I'm sorry.
Kathleen.
No, that's okay. Fred, for you to Town Administrator Sumner, do we have the money in the account?
Oh, yes, you do.
Okay, that's, as long as it's in there, I'm good. Thanks.
We at least are solvent at the moment.
Speak for yourself.
So I would entertain a motion. No other questions?
I have my hand up.
I'm sorry, you're scrolled below. Go ahead.
Yeah, you said the third or fourth time this has been done. Is it the third or fourth time this has been done on behalf of the Cemetery Commission?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, this is the fourth transfer request we've had since June.
Okay, because I'm concerned by this because there have been issues before, as I think some of us know.
Yeah, no, it's not that. It's a variety of things that have come up. This is the first that has to do with the cemetery.
Okay.
I don't know who had their hand up first. Jeff Tash?
Dale had it up first, I think.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry, Stephen.
Stephen.
That was Steve.
That's all right. I move that we approve the transfer of 2056 as presented.
Thank you. Do you have a second?
I'll second,
Okay.
but I do have a question too.
Well, this would be the time to ask it before we vote.
I just want to know how we'll be able to replenish our funds after these 4 transfers and what that's going to involve for next year.
I can answer that. It'll be a warrant article, as it always is. The reserve fund gets replenished via the town meeting.
I'm happy to second Steve's
Okay.
motion.
Okay. I say aye. Mo,
Aye.
Ira,
Okay, yeah, aye.
Kathy,
Yep, I,
Jeff Tash,
Aye.
Jeff Behrens,
Aye.
Linda,
aye.
Stephen.
Aye, but I'd like to know if the town administrator is going to keep tally. So when it comes time for the budget, we're going to put back everything that we've done.
Yes, so I'll, and what I'm going to do too is what I like to do going forward is every year keep a list of where the finance committee used their funds. And then over a several year period, if you do this in the budget that we create for you, then you can track where these reserve funds are. Now, this year, it's been heavily biased towards this huge shortfall that we have in the property and casualty liability insurance. And that's where almost all of the money has gone. And we'll be talking about that during the budgetary process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the last bit of finance committee business for tonight that's specific to us is to set the dates for, I'm going to say 2 meetings in February to do our annual budget reviews. And by the way, everyone's budget book is at Town Hall waiting for you, the physical actual copy of the book. So please get down there if you can and pick it up. If not, I would say get in touch through Karen, possibly to Rebecca, and figure out what alternatives there might be. I would recommend that we do the February 9th and the 23rd. I'm open to any concerns or pushback on that if other people have conflicts on those dates. Those are Wednesdays. Okay, we don't need to vote on that. It'll be February 9th and February 23rd. And thank you very much for helping us expedite that. So now I'm very happy to turn the meeting back to Ryan for the rest of the agenda.
Okay, so we're on to presentation of the fiscal year 2023 town and school budgets. And then Charlie, do you think it would be best to do the financial forecast at the same time?
I do believe it would be, if that's okay. I'd like to
Yep.
do an overview and then flow right into the forecast document.
Yes, I think that would be the best way to handle it. So if you may.
Okay. Okay, thank you, everybody. So what I intend to do tonight is just to go over my cover letter first, and it sort of touches upon a number of issues that we've been working on. And then once, as Fred had indicated, we do have budget books that we put together for everybody, and with quite a bit of detailed backup information. And talking with Ryan and Fred, I think we'll use that document going forward when your respective boards meet with department heads to review their budgetary requests. So anyway, let me just jump right into that, into the presentation. And what I've basically done with this budget, and I do want to mention that Judy Sprague, who has been helping out a lot, has done a lot of work for me and for the town on this project. So I just wanted to note Judy's efforts on behalf of the community. And while typically I would say to you that I would be working really closely with the town accountant on something of this nature, you all know that Mary and Lisa are so overwhelmed. Each of them are doing two-persons jobs. And so using Judy Sprague was a godsend to help me put this all together. And I think the other thing, obviously, is I wanted to create, you know, a document that I gave to you in reasonably early in the season, so you could have a, you know, complete deliberative process to review all of your department heads' various spending requests. So we have a budget, we have a warrant, and so I think it'll be efficient, because when you meet with department heads, you can go over their warrant articles at the same time. So anyway, as I tried to put together this spending plan for fiscal year 2023, I really was attempting to say, what does it cost to provide the same level of services that the community has enjoyed in fiscal 2022, the current fiscal year? So what would the costs be to mirror that same program? Any requests largely beyond that, I've built into the last part of this presentation, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So anyway, this document, when you have a chance to look at it, represents that plan. I will tell you that I hadn't received any budget presentations from the Cape Cod Tech, the elementary school, or the regional school. And I'm not surprised, it's very early in the process. So what I did for those budgets is I just assumed in the forecast that their budgets would go up 3%. I will tell you that I did receive the Wellfleet Elementary School's budgets today. And I did briefly review that with the principal. And frankly, the elementary school budget is down $10,000 over the current fiscal year. They've had a lot of retirements, it appears, and they've added new staff, and those folks are making less money than the more seasoned folks that had served your elementary school for many years. So, that's going to help out the forecast. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, when you get your budget books, what I did do is I used the budgeting module that exists within the Vadar accounting system. You paid for it, you own it, and I wanted to use that tool. So it's going to look a little bit different. But the nice thing about using the Vadar budget module is once town meeting makes some final decisions on whatever the budget might be at the annual town meeting, then it's a very simple process to then take the data that's in the budget and transfer it to the accounting module. It's just almost, it's rather simple and quick and accurate. So anyway, you'll notice that I've used the Vadar budgeting module. I wanted to talk about sort of a couple of critical building blocks of the budget. And when you look at the memo that I put together, I really talk about local receipts. And I think many of you know that you've really hit local receipts hard over the last several years to balance the budget. And if you remember when Mary, Lisa, and I were working on setting the tax rate back last November, we kind of ran into a wall on the local receipt side. And so we had to increase the use of local receipts from $2,500,000 to $2,800,000 just to set the tax rate for the budget that was approved last June. And as I talked about at that time, the Department of Revenue recognized that we had two alternatives. We could go back to town meeting and try to cut $300,000 or $400,000 out of the town budget in January, February timeframe, or just use local receipts. And that's what we did. We used the new money from cannabis and additional new money from room occupancy tax. So, there's not a lot of options on local receipts going forward. And we're just going to have to recognize that. And of course, there is competing demands for those new revenues, cannabis and room occupancy, by our department heads and by the housing trust and the housing advocacy groups in town. And so, right now we're in a very difficult situation because those monies are committed. And if we're going to talk about reallocating those monies for some other purposes like housing, then we're going to have to peel away local receipts over a period of time, but we can work on that this winter. The one area that I haven't spent any energy or time on, and I don't have a lot of local knowledge, is local receipts. You have all matters of fees and charges that are part of your spending plan. And I think it's really going to be incumbent for us to take a look at local receipts. And we just need to maximize every revenue stream we can, because there's not going to be many options available on those fees that I had just mentioned. And our property tax levy is absolutely at its maximum taxing capacity now. So I think that's an area that we should be spending some time on. And I think that, clearly we have two enterprise funds, the Marina Enterprise Fund and the Water Enterprise Fund, that particularly in the water side are heavily subsidized by the tax levy. So I think we're going to need to spend some quality time looking at those two departments. State aid, you just don't get a lot of money in state aid, and you're not going to. I don't see that changing in the foreseeable future. And as a matter of fact, your charges exceed your revenues by almost $180,000 when you look at all these categories. And in the budgetary memo that I put together, I gave you a complete list of, the revenues versus the expenditures on state aid. So you can get a sense over, I think I did 5 years, what's going on with state aid, revenue side and charge side. I didn't, I should have, I did notice that, that our expenditures on the school choice sending have increased substantively in the last couple of years. So I meant to talk to Mary Beth Rodman, the principal, today about that, but I frankly forgot about it. So that's an area that, it's worth talking to the school department about. I'm going to jump into, special revenues. And when I talk about special revenues, I'm really focused on a couple of areas, mostly the stabilization fund. And if you went back to, let's say early June last year, you had about $962,000 in the stabilization fund. But we used almost $630,000 to balance the budget last June. So the stabilization fund has decreased from $962,000 to $323,000. And I think that's a priority. When we get free cash certified, I think the first order of business that I would recommend to you and to the community is to replenish those stabilization funds. Because it's going to affect your bond rating. We still have time to remedy that. And so that's something that I'm going to be working on going forward. I also, I was, as I was trying to get some account balances working with Lisa and Mary, I wanted to take a look at the town's, Opeb account, other post-employment benefits. And I think that's something that you really should be very proud of. You have over $2.8 million in your Opeb stabilization fund. And there's a huge liability issue there, but it appears to me that you have been diligent making contributions to that account over the last several years. Now, we didn't add any money to the Opeb account last year. For obvious reasons. We're dealing with so many crises issues, but I do think we need to get back into the habit of contributing some money to the Opeb account. And right now, I'm suggesting that we look at appropriating $200,000 annually into that account. I will spend some more time to come up with a better long-range plan, but I'd like to get back in the habit. It's just good fiscal practice to start appropriating some money towards OPEB. Now, when I go to page 4 of my budget memo, and then I'm really starting to look at the details of your operating budget. Now, there are, this is early. I'm still working with a lot of estimates because I don't have actuals right now. However, I do know that all of your collective bargaining agreements for employees expire on June 30th, 2022, with the exception of the Wellfleet Employee Association. So you do have a contract settled with them for fiscal 2003 at 3.5%. So I've built those wages into this budget. I have not built wages into the budget for the police officers, the Teamsters, the communication workers, the firefighters, and some of the other contractual employees. Healthcare at the moment, I've included a 10% budget increase. It's probably high, but for planning purposes, I wanted to, be on the high side. We belong to the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group, and I expect to have rate increases from them within the next month. So we'll have some clarity soon on healthcare costs. And that's a collective purchase agreement that almost all of the communities on Cape Cod participate in a lot of the special districts, fire districts, water districts, organizations such as that. The pension retirement costs through Barnstable County Retirement, we did receive an actual for them, and that was more modest than I was really pleased. I thought it might have been 6 or 7% increase, but it was 3.4%. That's built into the budget. And on the Medicare side, I think we're a little shy in the current fiscal year. We have to pay, 1.45% of most of our employees. They pay 1.45%. We pay 1.45% for Medicare costs. So I have a 20% increase built into that. And then, as I had mentioned briefly when the Finance Committee was looking at the reserve fund transfers, that property and liability insurance, I took the current appropriation, figured out the shortfall, and I'm expecting a significant increase, 10%. That's built into this budget. So anyway, when I use all of those assumptions, the town budget would increase from $24,375,000 to $25,227,000, about a 3.5% increase. That's sort of what you're looking at the moment. And remember, that doesn't include collective bargaining settlements for all of those organizations that I've listed in my salary adjustment column and that I just articulated a moment ago. So that's something that we're going to have to deal with. And I would say too, is we did some calculations on wages for our employees, and it looks like a 1% increase would cost about $65,000 when you apply 1% to all of those organizations. So anyway, that just gives you a yardstick of what we might have to deal with. I'm just going to talk about a couple of special department issues that I think bear notice when you start to go through the budgets, particularly the fire department expenses. There's a significant increase in the fire department expenses. It's not quite $37,000. It's a little lower than that, but it's when we send our recruits to the fire academy. Back in the day, Chief Pauly, really did a good job, and he would work with, neighboring fire departments wherever their academy was located for his personnel to stay in their headquarters, sleeping facilities. And, it was really convenient and saved us a lot of money. With COVID right now, we can't do that any longer. So when our recruits are at training, we have to rent hotel space for them. So you'll see an increase in the budget for that. The Public Works Department, we've kind of shuffled some items around, but the diesel and expense line item was buried in the solid waste budget, and it really should be in the general Public Works Department budget. So you'll see that we've shifted those costs to the general expense line item, and the solid waste costs really haven't gone down by a corresponding amount because our solid waste costs are escalating rapidly. So you'll notice that. And then I did add a new $50,000 emergency contingency budget in DPW because they're really a catch-all. They do so much for your community, and they're in charge of all our facilities. And when we have a problem like we did with the public bathrooms at Town Hall this past summer, when we had to rent porta-johns for a large part of the summer, they had no capacity to pay that expense. So I am recommending that we add some $50,000 to the Public Works budget to deal with problems that have come up all the time. I had mentioned a moment ago that our property and liability insurance budget was terribly underfunded. for the current fiscal year. And you can see there's a little chart there that shows you that we spent $380,000 in fiscal 21. We only budgeted $334,000 in fiscal 22. Our actuals are going to be closer to $404,000. Hence, one of really the main reason that I've been raiding the Finance Committee's reserve fund for the last few months. I'm on a payment plan for that shortfall, trying to get to the annual town meetings warrant. We'll do a budgetary transfer to address it. And then you can see projected a 10% increase for FY 2023. So property and liability insurance is really a really difficult marketplace for local governments right now. The county assessments, that was sort of a help. If you take a look at that spreadsheet that I showed for state aid and state charges, there's a charge there for county assessments. So we were raising that money twice. We were raising it on the cherry sheet, and then we were raising it in the operational budget. So you'll see that when you look at that line item, or when I meet with you, it went from $203,775 in the current fiscal year to zero. And that's going to help us because I have some shortfalls that I need to deal with in the current fiscal year. So that'll be a blessing. And then I mentioned pension and retirement. That increase is more modest than I thought. And in this budget, if we pay our whole assessment in early July, there's a 2% savings. And that amounts to about a $27,500 savings. It doesn't appear that the town has been taking advantage of that recently. So in this budget, I'm recommending that we budget so that we pay that total bill in early July and capture these savings of 2%. So that's there. Healthcare, I've already talked about. That number will be out soon. I'm hoping it's going to be a little better than I've included in the budget to date. Under the town administrator's budget, there is a consulting line item for $20,000. And that's used by administration to deal with small projects and problems that come up throughout the fiscal year. I have recommended an increase in that sum for 1 year to $50,000. And I'm thinking that, Lisa, Mary, and we're going to fade away, and you're going to be hiring permanent folks to take over for us, which is going to be good. But I'm thinking that it might have some benefit to keep particularly Lisa and Mary available so they can help with a transition plan over the next fiscal years and assist these new folks as they come in, particularly on the finance side. So you'll see a significant increase in that line item, and that's why I'm recommending it. On the facilities and utility budgets that is embedded within the Department of Public Works of level funded utilities. And thanks to the effort of the Energy Committee and the Selectboard over the last few years, we have a new solar array that is now operational up at the capped landfill next to the transfer station. So that's really, exciting. We're going to be receiving annual rent payments of $30,000 a year. And then we're going to be receiving pilot payments, payment in lieu of tax payments from the vendor in excess of $11,000. So those are new revenues the towns are going to get every year for 20 years. And then we're going to have some credits, energy credits, on a number of our electric accounts. And those are estimated to be $20,000 to $25,000 a year. So that's why I've level funded that account. Now, Jay Norton and I met with the vendor who's developed the solar array up at the landfill, I think last week. And we went over the accounting mechanism that they're going to be using so that, you know, since Jay is in charge of facilities, Jay and Sheen Leidenfrost, that they can keep an eye on that to make sure that we're getting everything that we're supposed to get out of that contract. Now, the Marina Enterprise Fund, you know, currently that shows a net income over expenses of about $11,850. But frankly, you know, I think that I need to spend more time and energy with Will Sullivan on that. I'm not sure we're really capturing all of the overhead costs that we should be. If we're gonna, it is an enterprise fund. If we're gonna run it as an enterprise fund, you know, I think that we need to be, we need to spend some time and look at their true cost of operation. And I think that, you know, you can't make changes overnight, but it might be nice to work to take a look at that, to have a multi-year revenue and expenditure plan. So anyway, I'll work with Will and Lisa Sauvé on that project. And the same thing on the Water Department Enterprise Fund. You know, frankly, the subsidy in the current fiscal year for the Water Enterprise Fund was about $82,000. But in the proposed FY23 budget, it's almost $241,000. So, you know, when I mentioned we really need to look at revenues, I do think those are two areas that, you know, we really should pay a little bit more attention to going forward. And I, from what little I understand about, you know, your water operation, I know it, from what I understand, it was intended as a public policy matter to operate with some subsidy by the town. But I think that it's increasing rapidly enough that we want to take a look at that currently, immediately. And I will say that, you know, the water commissioners have been great. They have been working with us and with a water rate consultant to take a look at our rate plan and our rate structure. So that's something that we've had one preliminary meeting, but we have a lot more work to do in that area. And then I had mentioned that we're still waiting on the school department, except for the fact that I've received the elementary school budget, and that news is really wonderful. It probably will save, compared to what I put into the forecast, probably about $90,000. So whatever deficit that I talk about later on, when you get draft number 2, and I put the Wellfleet Elementary School budget in here with their new numbers, you'll see that deficit that I've identified will go down by probably about $90,000. Enrollment, I put some notes in there about enrollment shifts, and particularly on the Cape Cod Tech, your enrollment share has gone down from 16 students to 12 students. So my instinct is that the Cape Cod Tech budget, there's a good chance that that might go down or at least be flat. So that's the case. NOSIT, we should be getting some information from them soon. And then I put a whole new section in my budget memo on page 7. And you can see that we have a number of departments that are looking for new positions and new programs. That includes the fire department, would like to finish up their, you know, manpower expansion plan. I think this was the last year of a multi-year plan by Chief Polly to add 2 new firefighter paramedics. The police department, you know, is dealing with really some really difficult staffing situations. A lot of it has to do with service level demands, but also with the new state training requirements, you just won't be able to use seasonal police officers going forward. So Chief Hurley is looking for 2 new police officers. And then the shellfish department is asking for some increased compensation for seasonal staff, a new part-time administrative support position, and a small expense for phones. The Right of Public Access Committee would like to create a new line item in the amount of $2,500 to advance the good work that they're doing in the community on public access issues. And then the Wellfleet Housing Trust, also in a similar vein, is requesting an appropriation of $10,000 to pay for costs for, the good things that they're doing in the community. And then the last couple of things I'll talk about if there's any questions, but I've drafted, I created the second draft of a warrant for the 2022 annual town meeting warrant. It's in your budget book when you pick them up as a separate section. And my goal on the warrant is, now that I've got this budget and the forecast done, I was talking to Ryan Curley, the chair of the select board today. I'm going to do another pass on the warrant. There's a lot of, errors and typos and so forth in that document, because I put it together really rapidly. But my goal is to clean that up by the end of the week, and I'm going to send that off to town council so they can do a legal review of the warrant. And then, so when you start deliberating on the warrant, you've got really something that's, largely complete. Now, there's going to be new articles that continue to come in, but as they come in over the next few weeks, I'll immediately get town council review. So we're not going to be pressured with trying to finalize a warrant at the last minute. So anyway, that is in pretty good shape. I think that when you really look at the warrant, the biggest issue that we're going to have to deal with, and I'll talk about it in more detail when I get to the financial forecast, is that we have a lot of articles on there. There's been a backlog of, equipment replacement and projects. And so there's a total of raise and appropriate articles on there in the range of $1,150,000. So that's, and we don't have any revenues to support that. So I'll talk about that in the financial forecast. So Ryan, maybe I'll see if there's any questions before I jump into the forecast.
Yeah, let's open it for questions. Fred?
Unmute.
Okay, there we go. Charlie, I just wanted, just for my own understanding or whatever, to be clear that the forecast over the next 5 years, I don't want to diminish it, but it's sort of a business as usual forecast, right? The
Yes.
cost of running the town at more or less the level the town is run today. So if it jumps $5-6 million, that's your projection of what it's going to cost to provide relatively equivalent services, with the caveat that we might have to hire some new people. So it would not include necessarily major organizational restructuring in the town or large capital projects like a sewer or whatever. No projection of that, or even whatever, or new projects, new services that might be developed. None of that will be in the budget forecast. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the most part, that's right. And what I typically, did in Brewster, since I worked there for so long and I worked with the select board and the Fincom, I had a better sense of what our goals were over time. So there's a third page to my forecast that I haven't included yet. And that's when someone says, Charlie, what's it going to cost to add, a new division to the Department of Public Works to run the water department at this expense? Then I'll do some forecasting at the end of that. But obviously I would need some help to create, what are the scenarios that you might want me to evaluate. But I will have a tool where you can do that.
Great, thank you.
So right now, I would like to try to limit the conversation to the budget itself. We'll get to the forecast shortly. So John, can you unmute him?
I don't know why I was muted, but anyway, I think this goes to the discussion. If it doesn't, certainly tell me. Two questions. The solar power purchase agreement. Do we have an agreement to sell power back to the utility? Is that part of that deal?
Well, I'll tell you that what I know about that project is a little bit limited, so we might want to verify this with the Energy Committee. But there is an allocation plan where 70% of that energy production is used for several town accounts, fire station, police station, DPW, town hall. And 30% of the production for the solar facility is being used by the Nauset Regional School District. So I don't think we have any excess production beyond meeting our own needs.
I see. And the other question is to do with the Marina Enterprise Fund. The ongoing discussion and hopefully at some point in the near future, action regarding the parking situation down there. If we were taking revenues from parking, would that help to, is that something that could be put into the enterprise fund?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, those are just the type of things that I frankly think you have to start talking about.
So do I. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff. Sorry, you're muted. You're muted, Jeff.
He just has to hit unmute.
Here we go. My question is that we were underfunded from last year. We had expenses that weren't covered by taxes, and we need a Proposition 2.5 override to cover that. And then I'm hoping that your estimates, considering inflation and everything, but we have a significant increase just to maintain current services. Are we going to be, can we get like at least a breakout when we're looking at the overall 2.5 overrides, which are kind of compensating for last year and which ones are going to be for this year? And will those be presented separately?
Yeah, I could run some numbers for you to give you that information. I haven't done that yet. I was struggling just to get this all put together, to be honest with you. So.
Okay, so Stephen, which is Dale's iPad.
Oh, okay. I think I'm on.
Yep,
right?
you're good.
Okay. Thank you. Charlie, getting back to the water department, you said that it's looking at like a $241,000 appropriation that they're going to be looking for.
Yeah, I think their total budget is in the range of $408,000, but their total revenues are, I think, in the range of $168,000. So that's where I suggested there was a subsidy that's required by the town to finance that.
Okay, and on the revenue side of it, do they have anything budgeted for base service fee income?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to go over the details of that, but I will.
Okay, so just a rough estimate, because we're very lucky to have the water supply system we do have compared to other towns, but it's in this their rules or regulations, and it's fairly simple. I mean, their push is to get 500 hookups. So if you take the 241 divided by 500, you just bill out 482 per hookup, and that saves you coming to town meeting. You just bill it out to the users at this point. So that is something that I think when we get the budget from the water department, I hope to see a line item there for base service fee. Doesn't have to have anything in it, But moving forward, since we have these expenses and things, this is another opportunity to raise revenue other than coming to town meeting and asking for appropriations.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And that's what I mean about you all have a lot more knowledge of your community than I do, in the short time I've been here. But yes, there's going to be there's a new water main going in, and there's possibilities from certainly more hookups. So I think I could work with the water commissioners to do some projections about what that might look like, and try to build that into this model.
Okay.
So I would kind of like to follow up Stephen's comments. The water system, when it went to town meeting, it was pitched to the townsfolk as self-funding.
Oh,
Obviously that did not happen. I do not really find it acceptable that it's consuming more and more town resources. The water commissioners are aware of the problem. They've been discussing rate modifications for 4 or 5 years and they haven't done anything. I think at this point, we almost just have to say, this is all you're getting, getting gear. The rest of the townsfolk are not going to subsidize the system indefinitely. So.
yeah. Anyway, that's why I'd like to use this opportunity that we have a rate consultant to look at that. So.
Yeah. And then Helen?
Yes, I'd like to remind everybody that without having to pay the health benefits of the OPEB or anything, the water system has an excellent contractor, Whitewater, Incorporated, and a good part of their budget is spent paying that contractor, and it works well. They could be paid slightly more to do slightly more, but really Whitewater covers the needs. And if you look at, oh God, the pages aren't numbered, but in the enterprise fund for water, right there at the top, emergencies and so forth addressed by Whitewater are very well covered by them. And having a permanent, in quote, water department set of employees to do that would cost us a lot more and not necessarily be as good at it.
So point of order, Helen, that's not on the budget.
I'm
here at
looking
all.
at it.
We're not
That's why-
establishing a separate water department. This is what already exists.
Yes, that's what I'm looking at, Ryan, right now on the page.
So we're not talking about hiring town employees.
And FY 2023. My point is that they don't need more than they've got. And I do agree with you that they could have started billing to cover their expenses from the year that they began, and they didn't. Thank you.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, just like to point out on the same topic here that anyone with a calculator and a non-requirement to hook up to town water would be able to calculate that just putting it on existing users would, that there would have to be some subsidy involved with that. And I just think, it's a town problem. Not everybody has bad well water. And so I don't think that it's feasible for the town to just shift the total burden onto those who have poor water quality and have to hook up to town water when there is clearly issues that were, throughout the town and densities that are part of the entire town that caused the water problem. So we, it was a decision that was made, and we didn't do what Eastham did, and that cost the total tax levy a lot less than what Eastham pays, because not everybody's hooked up. But I think that there is some burden on the town as a whole to make sure that everyone has clean drinking water. So the level of subsidy, I don't know, and the level of cost increase, but I don't think that it's appropriate to not have any subsidy from the town to deal with water quality problems.
Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've had, for the Finance Committee, we've had several of these discussions over all of the years that I've been on them, and I would like to suggest that although this is a budget meeting tonight, we are not going to be able to have the time to iron out any fees and revenues or new sources of income. Can we table the discussion until the the Finance Committee, Fred, through you, Mr. Chairman, Fred, we are going to see these departments through our budget reviews, correct? I think this is going to be a larger issue, not just with the water system, but with all of the departments looking at new revenue streams and ways to maximize new revenues and curb expenses. So I don't think we're going to solve this here because it hasn't been solved in the many years that I've been on the Finance Committee.
Okay. So with that, to the financial forecast, Charlie.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So Rebecca, I think you were going to bring up page. I'd like to work my way through the financial forecast, sort of tell you how it works.
Okay, let me grab it. You keep talking, I'll get it.
Yeah, and so my goal was to create a tool that you could use going forward, and this model isn't as robust as there's a model that's the Department of Revenue has at the state level, but I think I used to use this something like this in Brewster, and I think it could work just fine in Wellfleet. So I'll, once Rebecca gets that sheet up. Now, while she's looking for that, how this is going to work is page 1 talks about revenues, and then page 2 is going to talk about expenses, and then there's a couple of detail pages in the back on page 3 looks at your local receipts. And I really give a lot of detail on your local receipts, and I think I've analyzed that over 8 years. And so if you want to try to peel away some of your local receipts and use it for housing or public safety or whatever it might be, you can use this tool to do that, and it translates into the front page. And then the same thing on, thank you, on the same thing on page 4, which is the cherry sheet. Anyway, here we are, and you can see I've identified this as draft number 1 with a date of January 13, 2022. And okay, thanks, Rebecca. Oh, yeah, I like that, Rebecca. Thank you. So if you really look at this front page, I mentioned to you it's revenues, and it's sort of how you build your budget, and you can see that section A is the property tax levy base, and I highlighted fiscal year 23 because that's what we're going to be working on. And in the way Proposition 2.5 works is you take the levy from fiscal year 2022, you can see that $17,937,000. You add 2.5%, which is allowed under the law. That's a $448,000. And then you get new growth. If there's new homes, new businesses, additions to homes. You can see back in fiscal 2022, our new growth revenues were almost $162,000. I've used, a more conservative number of $130,000. All of these little things I like to trend over time once you use this tool or a similar tool, but I think the 130 is a good number. And then you can see item number 4 is debt exclusions. You have a lot of items that the voters approved to borrow, projects, equipment replacement. We have to provide the debt exclusion detail to the Department of Revenue. And And you can see in fiscal year 2023, that number is $2,808,000. So we can raise that on the tax levy to pay for the debt that voters authorized in the ballot box. And then the Cape Cod Commission Act was an exclusion many years ago, $108,000. That shows up here. And then I should have put some detail in here. Number 6, I did show the costs of the 2 patrolmen and the 2 firefighters in that line item. So if voters were to approve those 2 special requests, this would pay for the salaries and all of the benefits for those new personnel. So I listed that in that account. And then, as I'd mentioned, you can see section B is estimated receipts. And those state aid numbers that appear there, they flow from the detail in page 4 of this document. So we can do all kinds of assumptions there. I think I used a 1% increase over the current fiscal year. That's why there's a slight increase. And then miscellaneous town receipts. You know, I talked about that earlier in my budget presentation, but that is, you know, motor vehicle excise, room occupancy, marijuana money, building permit fees, you know, all of those areas. And that detail is provided in page 3 of this document. And it flows again right to this front page. So if the select board were to say, hey, Charlie, we want to reserve this amount of money for housing, for example, because we do have a request from housing folks to dedicate some money towards housing, then I could use this tool to back the money out of here and reserve it for housing. But anyway, it's a tool that you'll have available. Anyway, estimated receipts, $3,161,000. And then, we need more money, right, to fund operations. Now, I've already mentioned to you during that review of the budget letter that I'd like to replenish the money that we used from a stabilization fund. So if the first priority, if we have free cash certified, which we should, is to replenish the stabilization fund. That's where that $644,200 represents. So I put it up front because I consider it priority number 1. Now, the same thing in the fire department ambulance funds. You know, we charge fees for people using the ambulance, and I think that's mostly insurance money. Now, that's interesting because I think Chief Polly will agree that, you know, that's one of those areas where you've used a lot of your ambulance receipts money really heavily over a few years, and those are one-time revenues that we're using to subsidize the operational budget. I've used the number of $375,000 here because that's what we would use to buy the new ambulance, and I believe to pay for training for the new paramedics. So same thing, I would work with Chief Polly to create a multi-year revenue and expenditure plan on ambulance funds, but they really should be focused first on ambulance and then on, you know, things that are related to that part of operation of the rescue department. So that needs a lot of work. But anyway, we should have the money to pay cash for the new ambulance that's on the warrant. That's what that is. The next year, now beach funds, number 5 is really interesting because, you know, you've used in excess of $1 million a year of the beach fund to subsidize the budget. And I just don't think we're going to have that kind of money available. So I think you had built up some reserves in the beach fund and you were hitting it pretty hard for the last few years. I did talk to Suzanne Thomas about this, and that 676 seems to be all that there's going to be available to us in June, when we have our annual town meeting in April. I need to spend a little bit more time looking at the past history on that fund, but I think that's about as good as it's going to get for a while. Cable franchise fees is just an in and an out. You know, we get, I think, 4.5 or 4.75% surcharge on people's cable bills. That money comes to the town and can be solely used for cable access services. So you'll see when we get into expenditures, an expenditure of that same amount. Shellfish fund, I forget what I have there. Oh, I have, they do pay $5,000 towards the Marina enterprise fund. And then we were going to use $21,000 to help with an article on the warrant to do some repairs in the shellfish office. So that's where those shellfish monies comes from. CMAS money is your revenue from solid waste disposal. I think that number is pretty good, $400,000. Recreation fund, typically we use about 20 grand out of recreation fees to subsidize the operational budget. Waterway fund, same thing. Then you can see here, I have the revenues from the Marina, 593,500. I have the revenues from the water department, $168,000. Then we have CPA monies. And then I have any borrowing articles that on the warrant. And that money, those borrowings there, I forget, but most of it is it's the fire suppression system at the elementary school, which is $2.2 million. And then borrowing money to purchase a new fire truck. Those both would be borrowing articles. So anyway, that's the total revenue that we have looking at this budget of $32,200,000. So Rebecca, if you can go to page 2, and I'll go back if you have any questions after I finish the presentation. So page 2, as I mentioned to you, is expenditures. You know, I've taken the town, school, and the debt budgets, and I've included that here, $25,227,000. And as I had mentioned earlier, that's going to go down because the elementary school budget is already less than I had included here. So that'll go down by about $90,000. There's the expense side for water and the expense side for the Marina. So that's sort of your operational budget in section A. And then in section B, I try to show all of, you know, that's really looking at the warrant for the most part. And what articles are on the warrant, what do they cost, and what are they total? And you can see that number 1 is I've taken every item on that warrant, every truck, every project, anything that doesn't have a specialized fund like the ambulance. And the only way to, if you're going to do those projects, we have to appropriate money to do it. We can talk about, you know, some of them you might want to borrow versus paying cash on. Some of them you might want to defer and have a more balanced spending plan over a few years. But anyway, I've showed you the worst case scenario for the warrant under number 1. Of course, item number 2 is appropriating money from free cash into the stabilization fund. That's what that item is. I've already talked about that. And for planning purposes, on number 3, I had mentioned to you, hey, a 1% raise for our collective bargaining agreements is $65,000. So I just said, oh, what would 3.5% wage adjustment cost? And you can see it'd be that $292,500. There's the warrant. Item number 4 is the article to pay for the ambulance. There's the cable money that I talked about on the expenditure side. And then shellfish equipment and projects, the 26. And then I have all of the CPA projects. They're neutral anyway, either the CPA has the money or they don't. So it doesn't really affect the shortfall in any way. There I have item number 10 is the 2 overrides for fire and police. That number is the same number that I mentioned on page 1. And then I have the debt exclusions for the fire engine and the fire suppression system. So section 3 is state and county assessments. And once again, that comes off that page 4 of my spreadsheet that gives you a lot of detail of what those charges are. And then we have to appropriate money for overlay reserve every year. We send out tax bills, we make mistakes, people apply for abatements, and that's how we provide abatements to people. So that number has to be appropriated. Right now, we don't have any special charges or deficits that I've included here. So you can see our total expenditures are the $34,420,000. And, looking at its totality, I have a shortfall deficit of $2,172,000. The operating budget side of that is the 739. That's going to go down by 90 grand because of the elementary school budget. And then I show the capital budget. I should call it capital budget special projects because they're not all capital. And that's the 1,433,000. So that's sort of how the document works. I need to spend more time looking over the horizon for 2024 through 2027. But largely what I've done is I've just taken the budgets and increased them, I believe, by like 2.5% or 2%. I mean, I don't know what they're going to be, but I just wanted to do a gross number. And if that were to happen, and I compared that to, I have some growth in the expenditure side, the revenue side, and you can see each year we have a shortfall. It's cumulative here, but you can see that our shortfall is in the range of $250,000 if you average it. So that's why I say, looking at our fees and charges can have an immediate impact on the deficit on the current fiscal year and on outgoing years. And the only thing I'll say, even if you increase revenues for the FY23 budget, the state is going to want to wait a year to see if those revenues are real. They really look at actual collections before they allow you to start using those funds. So you can't just say, oh, we're going to create a parking fee. We're going to raise $100,000. So we're going to use that for the current year. The state's going to want you to walk the walk. So whatever we do on the revenue side, it's largely going to benefit FY24 through FY27. So anyway, and the only other thing before I open up for questions is I wanted to make this initial presentation to the select board and to the finance committee, of course. And then I'm going to try to set up a meeting next week with our department heads, because they're a big part of this. And I want them to really be familiar with the totality of what we all have to work on together. You solve problems collaboratively and collectively, and they're a big part of these solutions. They're going to have ideas and see opportunities. And so I want to exercise that process But as I say, I haven't done that yet because this is my, first stop.
Okay. Fred?
Am I on?
Yep, you're good.
Oh, Charlie, thank you, by the way. It's already light years of what we had to work with last year. I don't know how to put this exactly. There have been conversations, let's put it that way, about overrides and I know we don't have a final number for free cash and there are numbers we don't know yet, right? But there is this sort of philosophical notion that if you do periodic overrides, you're fair to everyone. Everybody pays their little bit of the share and there you go. And that's how you pay for a town that's, at least at this point, looks to be persistently in deficit, at least for the foreseeable future. We can look at other ways to raise revenue, but there will be arguments that this is unfair to one group or another. Where do you stand with you and Lisa and Mary have had your hands in the guts of our town finance now for the better part of a year, really. So maybe the three of you understand the intrinsic issues with how Wellfleet raises money and what we need to spend. Where do you stand on doing periodic overrides without putting a number on what the first one might be?
Yeah, well, my experience has been that, if you really look at I mentioned up on page 1, section 1, the lion's share of your revenues are property tax levies, and your property tax levy goes up by 2.5%. But honestly, if you really look at operational costs over time, between employee wage adjustments, healthcare, pension, insurance related items, our costs increase greater than 2.5%. So I always used to take a look at it and say, I would try to keep my budgets as tight as possible, be responsible as possible. If someone wanted a new program, go get an override. And I think your fire and police departments are an example of that. They want new staffing, they ask the voters. And if voters want to approve it, they can do it in the privacy of a ballot box. They decide if they're going to have new services. So I think you've done a good job in that area. So you want any new program of any substance, you want to use the tool to get more levy capacity. You want to really work hard on your local receipt side, because I'll just use this as an example. If I'm going to build a new home or a new business or put an addition on my house, I believe I should pay the cost of that inspectional services through the fee that I pay to the permitting department. So that's why you want to look at fees to make sure that they're reasonable and competitive to what other towns are charging. But they're looked at. I frankly used to do them every other year. So I was always looking at revenues and fees to feed the beast of the operations that we have. And then in the end, there just comes a point in time where I would say 4 to 6 years, you really do need an operational override on the whole mass of operations. And that's how I used to structure my spending plan in Brewster. And of course, I should have mentioned too, you've done a good job in this. If someone has a capital project, new building, whatever it might be, fire suppression system, they've got to get an override, a debt exclusion. And the debt exclusion is nice because it's a taxing authority that only lasts as long as there's debt. And once the police station is paid off, you'll see a decline in your debt budget. That's one area that I haven't spent enough time on, is really looking at your debt budget over several years. It's something that I intend to do going forward. I have some estimates in here that they're not very accurate. So, I think I'd mentioned I really want to spend some more energy on 24 through 27.
Okay. Mike?
So just a quick question and then a couple comments, but Charlie, how, do you know how far we are away from a free cash certification at this point?
Yeah, well, it has, I'm going to say, because not everyone hears this, these two boards have heard this many times. We thought we'd be done by now, right? We thought we'd be applying for free cash certification right now. But Lisa's doing 2 jobs and Mary's doing 2 jobs, and we're behind. Now, I did talk to Mary McIsaac today on my way home, and she's, God bless Mary and Lisa is all I can say. I just constantly want to thank them for what they're doing on behalf of Wellfleet, because they're doing much harder work than I do. And so even like Rich Bienvenu, who's the assistant town administrator in Eastham, he's going to meet on Friday with Mary to go over her cash reconciliation. She's still, I can't believe they're still making slow, deliberate progress. She wants to review some of her work products with Rich because, he's a seasoned professional that has, a lot of skills in this area. So we're still hoping by the end of the month or early February that we'll apply for free cash certification and have something towards the end of February.
Okay.
Okay.
Jeff, are you done, Mike?
No, I just had another question quickly. The 2.875 million in debt and borrowing overrides. The bulk of that is the fire department elementary school sprinkler system. Is that?
Yeah, that's $2.2 million.
Okay. And then I just want to make a quick comment that, clearly we've been using free cash and one-time revenue streams to fund not only the basic operating budget, but also things like police cruisers and equipment. And we've been doing overrides for those, but as a stopgap, we've been using these one-time revenue streams. And obviously the cost of running a town has increased beyond 2.5%. And I think to follow up on Fred's question, I think it's appropriate to really start looking at having a regular, Prop 2.5 override, to make sure that our tax levy base is covering the cost of running the town, because our costs are increasing faster than 2.5%. So,
and if I could, Ryan and Mike, sorry to interrupt you, Michael, is I think that's one of the things I'm sort of trending towards is, I do think you need a operating budget override. I would really like to start talking about like a capital exclusion override, a sum of money, whatever that number might be, that's solely dedicated to equipment and capital replacement, special projects. And, I think that would give you the discipline to only use that money for those types of items.
sure.
Okay. Jeff?
Thanks. First, I, like Fred, want to just thank you, Charlie. This is really tremendous amount of information. Really appreciate it. I guess my question is, if you look at what the census says, we got an influx of, the population has grown significantly. I know that the price of housing in this town is exploding. And I'm just trying to get a feeling if, the two areas there would be the property tax and the excise tax. Are we going to be able to monitor, to see if those are increasing faster than what we're saying, the projections on inflation on the expenditure side?
Yeah, yep. So, I think that some of these revenues you can monitor quarterly, and some of them are annual. It's when, like for motor vehicle excise tax, it's like, usually you get like 2 commitments a year from the state. They send us the file to print the bills for motor vehicle excise tax because you register your car with the Department of Transportation. So, I think that's one of the things you definitely want to do is you want to look at your revenues on a quarterly, on an annual basis and see what the trends are. And, I think that we're going to be talking about this later on during the financial policies, but I will say, because, and Ryan's done all that work, but, in Brewster, and this is common in many communities, nothing special about what Lisa and I did in Brewster, but we would take our revenues and we would only use 80 or 85% of those revenues. So if we thought we were going to collect $1 million in room occupancy, we would use $800,000 or $850,000 because there are downturns, there's economic downturns, and if you're spending 100% of your local receipts, and there's motor vehicle revenues go down, room occupancy goes down, beach goes down, you got a revenue deficit. You got to raise that. And then the beauty of only using 80 or 85% of your revenues is it ends up in free cash. And then once you have some good fiscal discipline and practices, then it's fair to use some of your free cash towards some of these special projects. But you only want to do that after you learn to walk steadily. So I'm sorry to digress. So.
Okay. So as it is right now, we're looking at operating budget override of about 740,000, according to this forecast. And that's even with the local receipts increasing by about 800,000 in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Wellfleet has been kind of obscuring an ongoing operating deficit. And we really needed an override 3 years ago. And this is the result. If you have a more regular override, you get a smaller number on a regular basis. So it's less of a hit in 1 year.
Yeah.
But Helen?
Well, just quick comment to what you said and then a question for Charlie. I mean, a lot of that situation, Ryan, in my opinion, was caused by the weird fluctuations with revenue and otherwise because of the pandemic, but never mind. Anyway, here's a question for Charlie. I'm stating the obvious, but you didn't. Charlie, you have referred more than once to this capital improvement, sort of a general fund for capital improvement, which I imagine exists in other municipalities or not, but does that mean there would be a sum of money sitting there appropriated by town meeting without specific designations for what could be, what was in there could be spent? Charlie?
Yeah, so what would, if you were to go down this road and we asked voters, let me just say for $750,000 for a capital exclusion fund. So every year we would be raising that on the tax levy, and it would be a new line item up in section number 1 on page 1. Those monies would be reserved. And if the town, let's say the town in one particular fiscal year only spent $700,000 towards equipment replacement or facility repairs, the 50 grand would stay in the fund and then be added to the appropriation for the next year where you'd have $800,000. So it would be segregated, reserved, only can be spent with town meeting authorization.
Wait a minute. I understood all that, but let's say who would decide to use a section of that for a specific, let's say, fire truck? In other words, the appropriation through town meeting would have to happen even if that fund was just sitting there.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, town meeting would be making that decision.
On piece by piece basis, and it would
Yes.
just be there to be spent on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we could handle it by putting it into the capital stabilization fund, for example, which already exists as a line item, is just not funded.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot.
And, you know, with that being a, you know, a special purpose fund or agency fund, any transfers from it obviously would require a town meeting vote as well. So. All right, are there additional questions on the financial forecast? I have one last one, and that's, is there any possibility of auditing the building department records and see if any new growth has not been captured or fully captured?
Yeah, well, the answer is yes. What normally happens, and I haven't spent any energy on it, is when a building permit is approved, a copy goes to the assessor's office. And then once the inspectional process is finalized, the assessors is notified. And then we have a field person who goes out and reviews the project. So I could check with Nancy Vale, our assessor, to see how that's functioning.
Yeah, right now it's based off of spreadsheets.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think too is, obviously we have a new building commissioner. And yeah, that's an interesting point because, I was always like a revenue hound, right? And, every penny counts, that. And I would sit down with my building commissioner or my assessor to review, building permits and inspections and see what the trends were because, it is a significant part of our revenues, so.
Okay, are there any other questions on the forecast at this point? So with that, we're on to the town administrator report.
Oh.
Right, yeah.
You just gave it.
Oh, that would be me. Oh, goodness. I'm getting.
Yeah, you need a fresh glass of water.
Yeah. I actually did. I don't even know what I did with my water. Yeah, thanks. Oh, I have it right here. Thanks. Okay.
Charlie, do you
thanks.
want me to go to the next page?
No, I'm all set with that. Well, go to it for a sec. I'm sorry. You can see those are the other pages where I show local receipts, and then the next page is the state aid. And so I'm going to build some more tools into this document. Sorry, Ryan, but these are just a couple of them.
Yep.
So I'll keep working on this to enhance it a little bit. So sorry. Okay, now Rebecca, I'm going to go right into my report, which I can just verbally review. Thanks. Okay, I'd just like to go through a few items that Rebecca and I have included in the report. And I think the most important, I'd like to talk about the building department. We just talked about that a little bit. And, Vic Staley, who's sort of another refugee from Brewster. Victor stepped in at a really a terrific time of need, served as our interim building commissioner, and then has assisted with James Badar, our permanent building commissioner. So the good news is they've sort of caught up with the backlog and addressed a lot of issues. And another nice thing, talking about resiliency and backup, is that Victor will stay on as an alternate building commissioner, so that if Jim is away on vacation or whatever it might be, and we need someone to do inspections and to help out, then Victor is going to be there for us. But I would just like to, thank Victor for everything that he did for us. He stepped in I mean, literally, he retired on a Friday and he started working Wellfleet on a Monday. So thank you, Vic Staley. Now, the Herring River Restoration Project, I've been talking about that at every meeting because, you know, that is an amazing project. I don't need to tell you all that. But, you know, for someone like me stepping in and getting a briefing and understanding of the magnitude and the importance of that project, it's really incredible. Anyway, there's been almost weekly meetings with our state, federal, and local officials working on this project. Carol Ridley has been really, and Martha Craig have been quarterbacking these projects. Let's face it, there's a significant amount of money that's going to be available through state and federal resources. And I think that we're in a pretty good place to move this project forward. So those continue. As a matter of fact, I received an invitation today from Carol for 2 follow-up meetings, one of them on the easement issue, the other on the financing issue. So anyway, that's in good stead. Now, this number 3 in my report is the Cape Cod Water Resources Restoration Project and the Cape Cod Conservation District. Don Liptak, Steve Spear, Mark Forrest. These folks have been working on a number of water quality, shellfish, resource improvement projects all across the Cape. But anyway, we've had 2 meetings with them, your department heads, critical department heads, trying to prioritize a number of water quality improvement projects in Wellfleet over the next 4 years. And I think, you know, it might be worthwhile when we have some time on the agenda to maybe have Nancy Savetta and Jay Norton and Hillary Lemos sort of give a presentation on some of the projects that we're trying to work into a schedule. Now, it's going to be important that we're sort of, quote, shovel ready. There is some preliminary work that's going to have to be done by the town to advance these projects. And we want to prioritize those as we look at the upcoming warrant for the 2022 annual town meeting warrant. But, you know, there's a lot of money that's going to be available. And I think Wellfleet is going to be, have some huge opportunities to do some important projects. So anyway, I'm really excited about that. And that's a small thing, but, you know, they all add up. Number 4, Teresa Townsend has filled out an application for a grant for $2,500 to buy a new automated defibrillator equipment. I signed it, but she did all the work. So that was nice. The Town Administrator Search Committee had our first meeting today. And Bruce Behrens is going to be the chair of the committee. Rick White, our consultant, gave her an overview of his work product and schedule. And we have another meeting scheduled for, I believe, February 10th, where we'll actually start to review resumes from candidates for this position. So that's moving well along. These are a series of notes from Rebecca. You know, they had an important meeting on the 95 Lawrence Road project, talking about a timeline for the project and talking about the educational process for the public. So there's some movement there. And then the hazard mitigation plan update, you know, that is moving along really well. Once again, Rebecca and other department heads are working on that. And they're going to have to hold a public forum to get community input. And that's going to be scheduled sometime in the spring. Mass works on the grant on the water main project. Rebecca has been doing all the quarterly reporting in the reimbursement request. She's really, as you know, she's very knowledgeable of these programs and their requirements, and she's complying with everything that needs to be done. And finally, they're doing interviews for assistant DPW director starting next week. They have several candidates that they're interviewing. So there's a lot going on. That's all I have, Ryan.
Okay, are there any questions for Charlie?
Yes.
Go ahead, John.
Charlie, on the search committee meeting upcoming in February, have they settled on a time? I'd like to put that in my calendar.
Yes, I believe, Rebecca can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 1 p.m.
Okay. Is that about 2 hours or so?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thursdays at 1 p.m. is what they decided on.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Now, I will say that we're going to reach a point we're going to reach a point where these meetings will be an executive session because applicants for this position at this early stage are privileged and confidential under the open meeting law. And, you know, if we don't protect people's confidentiality early on, it'll have a chilling effect on potential applicants. So I'm not sure when that's going to start.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get my hand up. Charlie, when is the window of opportunity for applying close?
I did not bring that file home. I'm sorry.
Because through you, Ryan, to John, once all the applications are in, that's when they typically start
Yeah.
meeting in executive session. Thank you.
It is on the website, but I'll double check that. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, John.
Good. Just one last question for through you to Charlie. Will there be a YouTube or anything of the meeting you just had available?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Good.
I just have to trim it from what happened this afternoon, but I'm going to work on that tomorrow and it should be up by tomorrow afternoon, John.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing happens unless Rebecca really does it. So thank you, Rebecca.
Okay. So on to the comprehensive financial management policies for Wellfleet. So this is intended just to distribute it to wider and to, you know, so that people can sit down with it, gather the thoughts and give us feedback on it, or me feedback on it. Basically, this came, it's a result of, well, obviously Wellfleet's current financial, you know, the financial result of the town of Wellfleet. I looked at what other communities that experienced similar issues did. So a lot of them have these comprehensive financial management policies. These are modeled after some that were developed by the Collins Center, and they were they're modeled based off of model bylaws that are on mass.gov. And then I incorporated Wellfleet's pre-existing policies. And then Brewster also has a comprehensive financial management policy that they instituted after they had their financial hiccup. And I found that later, so I incorporated a lot of Brewster into it as well. A lot of it has to do with best practices. I initially had hoped to have it alongside, you know, the DOR DLS report that we're all waiting on, but we don't know when that might happen. At this point, I would really like to get input from Charlie's team before they leave in case the DLS report is delayed. What it does, it clearly delineates how funds of the town are administered, how the town manages its finances and the elements necessary for that management. And this was originally part of the work plan of that was submitted to the select board. But it became obvious that the Charlie's team was encountering rougher waters than expected, I would say. So when that became obvious, that's when I developed these. So Helen?
Yeah, I think it's obvious from what Ryan just said, but I want to be sure people understand. This was not a drafting effort by a group. It was entirely done by Ryan, and it's a really amazing document. And I'm going to thank him again publicly. I already thanked him privately. And for me, going through it, I'm very glad I went through it after I read the few things that we already have in select board policies that were included, at least in the select board's packet. Therefore, it's going to be available online if you want to take a look. Because what we have in our existing select board policies are not enough, really, not complete enough. So thank you, Ryan. And he did it all by himself. Thank you.
Fred? You're muted.
It's just trying to use one of these trackpads and get to the actual spot where the mute is the challenge. By default, everybody who's on the meeting tonight has a copy of the draft. Do you have a distribution policy in mind in terms of who's going to get to see it? It's a public document now, but are you looking for example, the finance committee to respond individually or as a committee, or where are you? I guess, how would you like responses to be channeled?
Both are fine. Typically they're channeled to Rebecca. And it would also go out to, departments as well. This is, because of its length, it's something that I expect we're going to spend some time on as we go along here. But I really would like to get a robust amount of feedback first before we really, start taking apart all the different policies. So does that answer your question?
It does. Just one quick follow-up. What's your time frame for commentary, and when do you expect to be ready to go to the next iteration?
That's a good question.
Tomorrow?
Yeah.
We kind of, Ryan,
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
we kind of have to vote on that in a way if we approve to send this out, right? So we have to sort of determine, because we use a policy on policies for this.
Yep.
So typically that's 8 weeks?
It's no more than 8 weeks, so it can be
More than 8
less.
weeks. So I guess my suggestion would probably be to do like a month or something like that, or 6 weeks, and then come back, and then we can revise it as a select board, and then probably work on it from there. I don't know.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense to me, because as I
This is
said,
the
I really
first
want.
draft for everyone else to see, but I'm sure you spent a lot of time on it and really thought these things through. So, yeah. Go
So I would really want to start, discussing these while Charlie's team is still on board. That's the other thing that we have to keep in mind, is that there's going to be a transition at some point. Charlie?
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to say that I did have a chance to review this with some detail this weekend. Ryan had sent it to me in some different forms, but I had some time to really read it this weekend. And really, I just wanted to thank Ryan. I mean, it's really an excellent document. And I think a lot of these things are best practices that exist in many places, but I think it's really a great start. And I just wanted to recognize that. So, and the only other thing, since it's just a matter of pride, since I almost had a nervous breakdown back in Brewster. The financial dust up in Brewster happened after I left. So it was a challenging time for me. So I had to say that. Thanks.
Kathy?
Hey, thanks, Ryan. I haven't read the document yet. I think I saw it and I scanned through it, but I haven't read it in any detail. So just on the issue of timing, I appreciate everything that Charlie and Lisa and Mary have done, because I've been meeting with them monthly, and it's a yeoman's job that they've done. And I really am glad that we are able to have Charlie's feedback on the document. But would it also be prudent to not put anything into a committed document until a new town administrator revises it as well? I'm just thinking there might be a person who's coming on board who would want some input in that as the new person leading the town administrator's job. So you can get the best of both worlds. Just a
Yeah,
thought.
I don't know. I trust Charlie's team. They're more familiar with the issues that we've gone through. And it might be a whole new team and 2-3 months, a new treasurer, a new town accountant, and a new TA. And we're not exactly sure what everybody's qualification or how extensive their experience is at this point. So that's my thinking. John?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that working with Charlie on this and presenting whoever comes in on the next boat with an accomplished fact, and then let that person distill it as may be, rather than having them weigh in on how we finalize it, I think would be the way to go.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, there's a policy and we need to spend some time and try and get it right as best we can and work with the team that's in there to prevent what just happened from happening again, and sort of set, our budgetary policies for use of cash to some extent. And then, if there's problems encountered by the next town administrator, or there needs to be some sort of relief from what we end up setting up as a policy, then we can amend the policy, because in the end, it's a town policy, but is it a select board policy primarily? So it's not going to sort of lock things in to a point where we can't change them through the select board policy.
Okay. So with that, I guess I'd move to refer the comprehensive financial policies for the town of Wellfleet to the town administrator to be distributed to all department heads and interested committees. I assume not all the committees are going to want to comment.
So I would second that. Oh,
Yeah,
Bill
to be
Dahl?
returned on by, should we say February? Charlie, what's the timeline for hiring the new TA?
Oh, even think about it. We're going to be doing interviews in February, and I suspect I'm going to. I mean, I'm. We're a little anxious, but I assume I'm going to be here to the end of March. Even if someone has to give notice, and it might even be a little bit longer. So we have time.
So to be returned by March 3rd, 2022. Mike?
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to have my hand up.
Sorry.
I don't think.
Is there a second?
Second.
So
Okay.
can I amend that, Ryan, to February 28th, that committees and departments heads have looked at this and commented, because then we're going to, as select board, have to have a public hearing or a lot of information out on this. And I'm assuming you want this This will be voted on at town meeting, so,
It won't be at town meeting. It's
okay, all
it's
right,
policies.
okay.
So yeah, I go for February 28th. Helen?
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody that on the books right now that we're acting out of before anything happens with this new policy, the budget and financial management policy and select board's policies is really pretty good. So it's not like we're out here flapping in the winds without, anything. Thank you.
All right,
Okay.
so I would second your motion, Ryan.
Okay.
You want to reread it?
As
Yep.
amended.
Yeah, as amended. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Janet, I.
John, I.
Michael, I.
Ryan, I.
Ellen, I.
Okay, and for the finance committee, just any comments, send them to Rebecca. And she'll keep track of them. Sorry, signing you up for more work, Rebecca, so.
That's all right. I have folders. Put them all in there.
Okay, where are we? Are we there?
Ryan,
Yep,
just have one request. So when this comes back to you, would although so presumably you'll be the one working in some
Yeah,
comments.
all the comments will go to all the select board.
And they'll come all to the select board. And then when we work them in, let's just make sure that there's like some redlining.
Yep.
Whatever.
Yeah, there has to be change tracking.
That's fine.
So.
All right.
I actually have a question, Ryan, before you move
Yep.
on. So you also have coming back to you on February 28th, the code of conduct policy from all
Okay.
the committees and department heads. Do you want me, I have a folder full of a lot of people that have responded. How do you want me to do that? Once you decide after the 28th to put it into a packet with all the comments? What do you-
Yeah, just send it to me on the 28th.
You got it.
And then, yeah,
I'm good. Just checking. Thanks.
okay.
Whoa, whoa.
It will go to everybody, to be
Yeah.
clear. Send
Yeah.
it to the entire board on the 28th.
Well, not on the 28th. That's when we're meeting.
No, that's when the comments are due. We're meeting on
Okay.
March 8th.
Sorry. Thank you.
So, Mike,
Oh, no, that was my thing already.
okay. All right, so any topics for future discussion? We all ready for bed? Or not bed, dinner, dinner
Ready
for
for
me.
dinner.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna have to adjourn both meetings. So I move to adjourn the select board meeting.
Ellen, second.
Okay, roll call vote.
Janet, I.
John, I, and thank you, Rebecca, for that nice little gift.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Michael, I.
Ryan, I.
Ellen, I.
Okay, Fred.
Yes, and I'd like to move to end the finance committee's involvement for tonight as well. I can't see everybody who's still on, so I'm just going to say if any member of the finance committee is opposed to adjourning at this point, please say aye. Otherwise, thank you for your service. Done.
All right, good night all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.